Hello and welcome. My name is Brian McAvoy.
And I'm Tim Shank. This is Two Cyborgs and a Microphone. 2 parts cyborg,
1 part microphone. This is part 3 of our series on immortality.
Last time we talked about uploading a person's thoughts and personality to a computer. This time we're looking at immortalizing a person's whole body.
Yep, we started off with just freezing a body until it was ready for some kind of implantation into a robot or something. But now this time we want to say, like the proverbial fountain of youth, to actually make a person live forever. And there are people right now who believe that this is within our grasp, within the lifetime of people who are alive right now. Maybe not necessarily the people researching it, but maybe their kids.
Well, it's not unreasonable, is it, Brian? I mean, the body is a machine, biochemical, but it's electrical. It's a machine. So if it's a machine, there should be ways to replace components, extend the life of components, because it is a machine, even though that's not how we've considered it for really since the beginning of human history.
And it depends how you define machine too. I mean, we're squishy. Most machines are rigid.
Squishy at one level, but when you get to the molecular level, it's very mechanical. My wife is studying, she's studying nursing, but she's getting into, she's getting into molecular biology. It was one of her classes. And when you look at at least the graphical representations of, if you look at how electrons and chemicals are moving between the cells, through the cell walls, it's very mechanical. And I think that's just something we don't experience at one level, but if you go deep enough, it's very mechanical.
Most of those processes have been defined, and there's still some mystery, but yeah, there's a lot of us that is not mysterious at all.
Yeah, that mystery is disappearing very quickly nowadays. Very quickly nowadays. And now we're building molecular machines on our own. I mean, we're making machines that do some of the same things, that transport certain molecular components from one place to another, that can snip DNA just because of the type of proteins we're using, which is something we talked about, I think, recently when we talked about CRISPR. So at that level, at the molecular level, it's not squishy anymore. I mean, there's very solid lines. I mean, it's very solid at the molecular level. Now, the plasticity, the way our skin is flexible, things like that, and the way, the soft squishiness you're talking about, that is not necessarily as prevalent at a certain level, at the molecular level specifically.
Or even relevant.
Right.
I mean, like you said, once we break those tasks down, okay, if we understand how something works and we can start working on ways to, like you said, improve or to make them act differently, or instead of degrading, we can repair them or keep them from wearing out.
Let's bring this to a level that I think we all can identify with and talk about anti-inflammatories. We're talking about like Advil and Aleve. They have a certain molecular structure that makes blood more liquid. It decreases the viscosity of blood, which decreases inflammation, and through decreasing inflammation can help with muscle pain, can help with headaches and things like that. They decrease inflammation by decreasing the viscosity of blood. So that's a pretty simple way to look at it from the mechanical way. We have a compound that makes blood more liquid, and through that, we decrease the inflammation. We let the blood flow be more free. And that's just one way to change the way the machine works. Just the same as using in the past, using 5W30 oil in the winter. It's very similar to that.
And one thing we notice about biologicals is systems are so intertwined, whereas like, hey, your car stopped moving, oh, it's out of gas, or it's this issue, or you need to replace the fuel pump, bam, you do that. In the body, your fuel pump is maybe your heart, and that's tied to a lot of different things. You can do something to your foot and that hits a nerve that's attached to your fuel pump. it's a lot more interconnected, whereas the machines that we build and what we think of, they're more modular.
Yeah, I get your point, and I agree with you entirely on that. But at the same time, if you look at a component of the car, I mean, you're kind of, well, I guess you are talking about that.
Oh, I'm just making a point. I'm not arguing.
Yeah, well,
not yet.
No, Brian, you know I'm not trying to argue with you. Why do you always got to start a fight?
You are, Tim.
You always got to start a fight.
This is recorded. I will show you where you are arguing.
Every episode, you got to start a fight, Brian. You try. I see it.
Not every episode, Tim.
Damn close. Anyway, I mean, it's very similar. It is a machine. The body is a machine. So, hypothetically or theoretically, there should be ways to keep that machine alive. And we've done things like replacing parts. We have prosthetics, pacemakers, different things like that we have replaced parts of that machine successfully, very successfully in some cases.
Mm-hmm. And biohackers were adding peripherals like finger magnets and RFID tags.
Right.
So one more reason we're kind of like machines.
Yeah, I would say that qualification of kind of like machines is I don't think that's even valid. We are machines. Very, very, very complex machines, and not just mechanical, but we're bioelectrical. We're electrochemical. There's different types of mechanics going on. We are electrical systems. We're chemical systems. We're mechanical systems. All kind of combined and rolled up through some undefined number of years as we've evolved. These machines have just gotten very, 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 very complex compared to what we do. And that's just natural. I mean, that's not unexpected. But once you realize that, and you realize how to treat your body as a machine, how to consider your body as a machine, which is what it is.
Makes grocery shopping more interesting.
So let's talk about extending that machine then, because who was it? You brought it up, and I've done a talk on Aubrey de Grey.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, and in his honor, I'm drinking Earl Grey tea.
Oh, excellent.
Which has really nothing to do with the other.
So Aubrey de Grey is the founder of the SENS Institute, SENS. He proposes that there are 7 conditions that lead to death, that lead to age-related disease, which results in death.
Yeah, I remember when I first read about him, people were not happy with him because he was saying, yeah, this is what kills us, and here's the destination of immortality shouldn't be that difficult. And people were like, screw you, dude.
Yeah, let's talk
How
about
dare
that.
you just traipse in here and say, oh, it should be simple.
If there's anything we've known about humans throughout history, is that every human's life is going to end. That's a hard thing to reconcile as you're going through life. Is that, okay, eventually I do not exist. And there's all these coping mechanisms. I mean, some people think religion is coping mechanism for this eventuality that the machine's going to break. Do you think that's why people had such a reaction to Aubrey de Grey's theory and proposal that we don't have to do that?
I kind of liken it to Newton getting hit on the head with an apple and going, gravity, it's gravity. I gave it a name. He runs into town and says, hey, this is gravity. It makes things fall. It's the attraction between two bodies. And people are like, dude, we've all known that things fall. You're not telling us anything new. Stop trying to sell us something because you're telling us stuff we already know. And I think that's how I view Aubrey de Grey, is he's saying here's the most obvious thing in the world, but he's the one who wrote it down. And that's what science is, it's writing it down. And I would love to be in Aubrey de Grey's shoes 30 years from now or something. People are either going to be like, yeah, dude, he had it right. He knew it all along, and thanks to him. Or they're going to be like, okay, just another quack. Or they're going to say, that dude was so far ahead of his time.
I don't know if I agree with you. I don't agree with you on that. I think people cling to death because that's something they've resigned to. I don't think that people want to accept the potential for their machine to extend because they've already decided and come to terms with the eventuality that it's going to end. And when people come to terms with something they don't like, somebody comes along and saying, no, you're wrong. You can, that eventuality doesn't need to happen. It's hard for people to reconcile that because they've already come to terms with something that they dearly wish wasn't true.
Let's say you were Christian and firmly believed that there was a spot in heaven for you. And then somebody comes along and says, man, you can stick around here forever. You can hang around on the earthly plane until the end of time. And if somebody was like, dude, I got a spot in heaven, leave me alone. It's not that great here.
You know, I'm not along these lines, but there's a lot of people that think that whole concept of a life after death, an afterlife, is a coping mechanism for the eventuality that this life ends. I don't believe that. I want to be clear on that. I'm not in line with those beliefs, but there's a good portion of people that even you and I both know that are avid, I would call them atheists, that feel some sort of empowerment maybe because they've accepted something that throughout history people refuse to accept or cope with because they can't deal with the concept of non-existence. I don't feel that way.
This episode isn't about existential dread, we promise.
I think the majority of people believe there is an afterlife of some kind, whether there's proof of it or whether there is any evidence of it or not. And I'm actually I could probably put myself in that category. Let's get back to Aubrey and what he says.
Should we step through the 7 steps?
The first one in my list, and I don't think he puts them in any specific order when he talks about them, is mutations. Chromosomal damage or mutation that changes the way cells replicate. Nucleic DNA we're talking about.
Since the nucleus is the CPU of your cell, once that stops functioning properly, you have a useless cell, or worse, a harmful cell.
Cancer. That's a perfect example of that. That is uncontrolled replication of a cell, and that is attributed to the DNA of the cell, because those cells, as they replicate, they copy the same DNA, and that DNA is programmed to reproduce uncontrollably. Telomeres. That's one thing that's huge on cancer, is the shortening of telomeres. As I understand it, I'm a hack.
I'm no better. So the next one I have on the list is similar. It's mitochondrial mutations. As we all know, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell.
You're right. I mean, mitochondria, they are very, very important. And one of the things that happens with mitochondria is in the mitochondria, I've heard people state it as fact, or scientific, scientists or scientific papers stated it as fact that mitochondria are some sort of bacteria that worked its way into our animal structure and became embedded in all of our cells, in all mammal cells actually. And it has its own DNA. It's only passed down from mother to mother. It doesn't come from the father. The father doesn't transmit any mitochondria to the babies. But mitochondria convert ATP into electrons and use a certain enzyme actually to send free electrons into the membrane of the nucleus, into the nucleus of cells. If anybody didn't know, I don't know, that might be way too much information for people because we don't even talk about what mitochondria do, I guess, in this context.
It's what converts the energy in our blood into energy that cells can use, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Way to take that to a high level. I appreciate that.
I know how to dumb things down.
The third thing is intracellular junk. It's waste and byproducts inside the cell that the cell can't rid itself of. In young cells, there's a very active process of cleaning, of moving these extra chemicals that don't actually support the cellular growth and function out, where we can excrete it. Intracellular junk, it just interferes with the healthy functioning of cells. And there's another junk, right?
Yeah, on the outside, which is stuff that gathers just outside of our cells that we're never able to flush.
Right. It's in between cells that prevents their communication and the transferring of important compounds between cells, which is usually happens because of sugars. One example is calcium in the heart. One of the main causes of heart disease, or one of the primary things that creates the conditions for heart disease, is calcium is not removed from the heart. It ends up being in between cells in the heart.
Mm-hmm. And all that extracellular junk that kind of are little miniature wrenches in our little microscopic machines, those can cause things like Alzheimer's. Your brain doesn't work the way it should.
Yeah, a big indicator for Alzheimer's is those plaques. Mm-hmm. They call it amyloid senile plaque seen in the brains of Alzheimer's, and that is, I think, if I understand correctly, it's between the brain, in the gray matter, between the brain and the skull. There's these plaques which crowd the brain. They build up. Your brain, your biological system is just not removing this extracellular junk.
Alzheimer's is probably the scariest thing I can think of.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If I get mauled by a bear, I see it coming.
And it's horrible for the families and people. I mean, how can you not be remembered by people that loved you and raised you? That'd be just terrifying. It's one of the worst things that could possibly happen from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah. So the next one on the list, I think, is maybe kind of obvious. It's cell loss and atrophy, when you just lose cells faster than you can make them up.
And this goes to the repair system in your body. I mean, when you're a young person, you can do all kinds of damage to your brain and body, and you just come right back from it. As you get older, those repair mechanisms, they just don't replace cells as fast as they should, or as fast as they need to anymore, until finally all of these organs are not able to function at a level that supports life anymore.
Yeah. When old people fall down, they break something, which, from what I understand, is very frequently their hip breaks and they fall down rather than the hip being broken by the fall. But it's just that your body is not able to replenish your bone structure fast enough, that it's just depleting.
And then the obvious one, and one that's probably in a lot of people's heads, is too many cells. Cells that replicate more or faster than we want them to. And the main example of that is cancer, which is called an epidemic nowadays. That's a real big problem. I mean, cancer, things that replicate without out of check, that's a big deal. And then now this one, I don't think I fully understand, but I'm going to read this verbatim off of Aubrey de Grey's Wikipedia page.
Let's hear it.
Extracellular protein crosslinks. Cells are held together by special linking proteins. When too many crosslinks form between cells in a tissue, it can lose its elasticity and cause problems, including arteriosclerosis and presbyopia. I don't know what that is, but that kind of even sounds like things like macular degeneration. Age-related eye problems or sight problems are caused mainly by the lack of the ability to flex in the lens. I've had to get glasses. I never had a problem reading, but at one point I couldn't read my phone anymore, and that's because the lenses in my eyes don't flex enough to focus on close things.
They mentioned the elasticity of skin, and you have to be like the reed. You have to bend when something pushes. Because if you're like, imagine if your ears were not somewhat flexible. Imagine if your ears were filled with bone instead of cartilage. They'd be broken all the time.
Sure.
They'd be so brittle.
All right. Well, one of the other is cellular senescence, which is too many cells. It's when cells can no longer divide but do not die.
Like that unwanted guest at a party. They're not helping clean up. They're just hanging around, kind of getting in the way. They won't even move to let somebody useful vacuum underneath them. They're just occupying space and taking energy from your body.
I don't know if this qualifies as cancer.
I think they're similar, but cancer implies a mutated cell, a cell overproducing. This is just a cell that is dead weight in your body. I think that's okay. I think that's the distinction.
I want all of our listeners, if you're interested in this, go look him up. Look up his TED Talks.
What's the most exciting perspective thing you've seen, Tim?
When we're talking in the context of age-related disease and death, there's something that's really I've been watching for years, and I think, when we were in TC Plus, I did a talk on this stuff. Harvard, I think it was Cambridge, and the Institute on Aging, they found that a version of niacin essentially reversed the age of all soft tissue in mice, and that's moved on quite a bit. And that was like 3 years ago, or almost 3 years ago now. It's becoming available now. It's really going crazy in Japan. There's human studies, but it looks like we found as close to the fountain of youth as we've seen yet. And I'm really looking forward to trying that. I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on some, doing some treatment.
Neat.
So to all of our listeners, thank you for listening. We'd like to invite you to email us at cyborgs@twocyborgs.com. You can also email either of us at our name at twocyborgs.com. That's either Tim at twocyborgs.com or Brian at twocyborgs.com. We'll definitely get back to you right away.
And we've got our site set up, twocyborgs.com. Check out our store. You can get those hooded sweatshirts with the Two Cyborg logo on your tummy. You can support our podcast and stay toasty warm. This is Brian McAvoy, and I'm wearing one of those hoodies.
And this is Tim Shank. You have been listening to Two Cyborgs and a Microphone, brought to you by Two Cyborgs, who may or may not have a microphone.
Spoiler, we do. Like, follow, share, +1, and don't forget to subscribe on any of our popular podcast services, including Google Play Music, iTunes, and Stitcher. Help us move up the podcast ladder by subscribing and commenting on iTunes. And if you can't donate money, donate a comment. That helps us quite a bit.
And speaking of donating money, Brian, we do have the patron site opened up. Go to our website. We appreciate the support. And now we're also on Twitter at Two Cyborgs.